edit pane, and they have guides and things to walk you through. But what we'll do is we'll start on a few things. The first one is this most recognizable water hazard. I can zoom in and you can see it doesn't seem to line up on either side, which means it's probably not that good. So what I can do is that, this doesn't look like it's valuable data to anyone. So if it looks like the data isn't very good, I just delete it. I don't know if you're supposed to keep data consistency or not, but I think that it's easier just to remap from the beginning. And so for a water hazard, I'll choose an area, and then I'll go through here, and then you can click spacebar, or you can left click your preference, and basically you're just going around the edge of the water hazard and just clicking right where the water line is. And I like to do a couple features first and then import them into the game editor, and then just see kind of how things line up. And you can see that that point's a little off, but it's not a big deal. I'd be more concerned if it were like a green or something. And so you can see here that there's kind of like a shadow of a tree, and so it gets a little hard to see, but basically you can look very closely and find the outline. Of the water hazard. And then, so for water hazards, it's not too important exactly how they're rendered, and that's mostly just because the way that the golf club does water hazards, it doesn't lend itself well to being set from a computer. And so basically what I do in game, just to help you out, is we render them as mulch. And it basically just says that when you're ready to sort of bring in your water, this is the area that corresponded to the water that you should be trying to cover with the water feature. And so we're almost there. All right, and we made it. So now you can either double click or click on the last point, and that will complete your shape. But now you can see that we've got the full water hazard here. So now we need to select what type it is. So now we can search for golf. And why did it not come up? Area golf. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened with the search, but what you want to do is search for golf. Golf features should pop up, and then you can select either lateral or regular water hazard. And I'll choose water hazard and click accept. And there we go. We got our first water hazard. And then so I'm gonna go, and just to save time, if something's good, you can just click on it, search for golf, and then make it water hazard. And so you can see that these don't entirely line up, but we can mark them as water hazards anyways, just to sort of save time for the tutorial. Like if we look at this one's actually done a lot better. Like this, I would actually correct because I'm nitpicky. Like, see, it's very clearly a different shape, but that's all right. So what I'll do now is I'll go up here to this little par 3, which has a distinctive bunker shape. And now again, we'll do an area. And so for these smooth parts, you don't have to click too many times, but as you get into the corners, then you can really start to make the points less spaced out and more dense. And that really helps preserve the shape of the bunkers once they end up in the game. And so for bunkers, I like to trace the outside of the bunker. I think that that gives the best result. But if we decide in the future that there's a different, better way to do it, then I'm sure we'll have guides created. So now you can search for golf features, and we can do sand trap. All right, looks great. And then now for greens, what I like to do is I like to select sort of this area here, like just inside the fringe. And so I'll make a nice little quick outline of this green. And you can see that this is Bing in the lower corner of the editor. And in my experience, it's been that Bing tends to have some of the, and you can see I was way off, but I'll show you how to fix that. Bing, I think, usually has the best lineup, but it doesn't have the clearest data. Like here, I can't really tell where the edge of the green is, so I'm just gonna expand it. And a trick is that if you need to add a point, you can click the little arrows, and that will let you add new points. And so just for now, what I'm gonna do is just drag everything up to where I think the edge of the green actually is. And usually greens are smooth, so you can tell. And like this one's kind of behind a tree. But something like that is probably a good first step. And I'm just gonna go here, and it's usually best to make the shapes sort of smooth here as best you can. And so now we can go here, we can search for golf, and I'll go through all of the different ones that are possible right here. And Fred Daddy brings up a good point that you can go to Google Earth and look at the green shape if the Bing image is poor, and that does help you. Because in Google Earth it's 3D, so you can rotate around and look behind and around trees and really get a good idea of what the green shape is. But we'll talk about another way that you can use to get better quality data in OpenStreetMap in a minute. But the current types that OpenStreetMap supports are golf fairways, greens, lateral water hazards, rough, sand trap, tee boxes, water hazards, and driving ranges. And the editor and tools do support all of these. And so for instance here, we can come back here, we can see that we've got a couple tee boxes. So I'll just go ahead and quickly line out these tee boxes. All right. Okay. And then now another thing is that we don't talk about them yet, but there's also the line feature. And the line one will be pretty important. And so this one, what we can do is click here on the longest tee and then click in the middle of the green. And then if you search for golf here, what you get are golf hole, golf cart path, or golf walking path. And so we'll click golf hole. I know this is hole number 2. It's a par 3, and the handicap doesn't matter. But if you enter these here, I will import them into the game, and it helps that you can create a fully playable course directly from Lidar and OpenStreetMap. And there's also a little bit of fairway here, so I'll go ahead and line this out. Now, sometimes if you get too close to, you can see that it tries to merge. And usually I just try to avoid having that happen. And so this one, it's not too important, so I'm just gonna click very rough, and we'll come back to this and talk about the finer ways that you can edit this. All right, and so I would search for golf, or sorry, I need to click this, then area, then fairway. All right, so we've got hole 2, we've got tee boxes, we've got sand trap. Yeah, definitely don't try to avoid overlapping your waypoints. And then, so the last thing I'll do is I'll just take a line, and this is a line type, and we'll go right down the center of the cart path. And the cart path isn't too important, and just basically click every so often. If there's a corner, you can make it sharper just to make it smoother. And then there's a line, so we'll skip over the line. Keep clicking the middle of the cart path. And this is a nice long straightaway, so I can just kind of click like this, and it should work with some fixes I did last week to make it nice and smooth. Keep clicking. Just keep clicking. And eventually you can just make a couple of these cart paths and just go around the entire course. But I'm gonna stop here for now. And you can see here that I wasn't too accurate, so I'm gonna move these points, add a new point, move this one back, and move this one over, and move this one over. And so now I got that curve nice and straight. So now if we search for golf, we can find golf cart path. And so this will render this path as a cart path in the game. I also added golf walking path, and this is for more of your like courses where you don't have cart paths, but you've got like walking paths and you want them to show up as splines, so you can render them either in mulch or shorter grass or some kind of other surface. But this is definitely a concrete cart path, so we'll choose that and we'll click OK. All right, so now looking at my hole, I've got my cart path, I've got my actual golf hole, which again is hole number 2, par 3. I've got a bunker, fairway, and green. All right, it looks good. So now I'll save it, and I'll say Rancho Golf Course Golf Features, just something like that. And now I'll click Upload. And so now these changes are going and they're uploading to OpenStreetMap. And so now, from now on, they should be available for everyone, whether they're viewing the map or using them for other purposes. The data is all very public and open, which is nice. So I'll take one last look. So the important ones that we did are this one golf hole, as well as this one water hazard down here. And so I'll look and I'll try to decide if there's any other features that are really prominent, like a creek, but I don't believe this course has them. So I think we're good. So now what we can do is we can go back into the tools, and it's been about a minute, so usually that's enough time. And so in order to get the OpenStreetMap changes, we don't need to process the LiDAR again. In fact, we can just go ahead and go to the import terrain because we've already made the file and the mask, so why get rid of those? Make sure your OpenStreetMap is set. We want to import everything we can. And now this time I'm going to add the background terrain at this default scale of 16. And everything else looks good. So we'll select our course folder, and it's going through and it's making a background. It's filling the holes in the height map again. But this time when we reach OpenStreetMap, it will hopefully pull down these changes and render them in the course for us. So let's find out. So sometimes this takes a little bit of time, especially if you render the background. But the background was a feature that a lot of people requested because if you remember, there were those very steep cliffs. And you can fill those in using sculpt terrain, but it wasn't the easiest thing to do. So now the background's done. So now it's going through and it's doing the high detail, which is everywhere that's a playable golf surface. And while this is running, are there any other questions about OpenStreetMap for now, except for the flat course, which we'll come back to. All right, so it says done rendering course preview. So now let's see if we've got our features. Course tools. Hey, look at that. So right there, now you can see big differences from before. So now it's actually drawing the shapes of the water hazards where they are. It's drawing all of the extra terrain that we added. And it's also drawn a little tiny preview of our hole. You can see the line in red. You can barely see the bunker. You can see the fairway and the green. World Revolver asks, where is the OSM data? I need a little bit of clarification on the question, but if you have LiDAR data and it has a good projection information, then we automatically pull it based on the latitude and longitude of the LiDAR data, and we do all of the correspondences to try to make sure that everything lines up the best we can. MP1972 says, if you want to identify areas that don't necessarily fit one of the predefined categories, can you label as water to bring that area in as mulch, even though it's not actually water? I wouldn't recommend that because OpenStreetMap is sort of like a public resource for everyone to use. So if something's mislabeled, then it brings down the quality of data. And if it's something you rely on, then you're liable to have someone come through and sort of nitpick and change it on you. Is there an example of something that you would want to draw an area for that isn't represented as a type? World Revolver said, I edited in OpenStreetMap. How did I get those into the editor? And yes, it was all automatic. We try to do everything we can using the dense geospatial information we get. K. Scott asks, going back to waypoints, why are extra waypoints bad? They aren't necessarily bad. The thing that we were talking about specifically, and I'll do it here to show everyone how to recover, is let's say I was going to refine this fairway. And so I'll click here and I'll drag this and see how the line highlighted. If I let go, it doesn't look like anything bad happened, but now I'm going to change the fairway and you can see that it's actually changing the routing of the hole. And that's not something that we want to see because it combined the two waypoints. So if this happens, you can right click on the point and then you can hit split and that will split them into two. Then what I like to do is drag, well, it should have. Oh, sorry, you need to hit disconnect and then you can move them all separately. It's not split, it's disconnect. So now you can see that they're all together. And so what I'll do here to fix this is I will continue the hole, reconnect it, and then I'll just delete these extra points that I don't need. And you can see that it moves your camera. And we can just drag the hole back. And so now it's fixed. So now there's only the waypoints that we want there. And we've successfully freed this point. And so remember that it's not split, it's disconnect. This is how easy it should have been. So the MP 1972 asks, large overgrown areas in prairie grass. I remember this from the forum. So he's trying to figure out the best way to identify these so you know where to add tall grassy areas. And I would go ahead and add that as rough. Rough should be used really sparingly because the default in a lot of the TGC courses is rough. So the only places that I really like to see them are in desert courses or for these kind of situations where you do prairie grass. So just to show you what this looks like, I'm going to make an area and I'm going to draw it all around here. And I'm going to call it rough. And then I'm going to save. And so this isn't realistic for now, which I'll come back and delete this. But what I'll do is click save. I always leave it the same. Not a lot of people are into the golf course editing on OpenStreetMap, even though I believe the tools are especially powerful for this kind of work. And so by marking the prairie grass as rough, even if it's not a desert course, I think you can go in and you can change how the rough renders or the surface type of that spline. And then that should be able to give you like a different color of grass or a different texture of grass. You can change it to heavy rough, you can change it to normal rough, or anything that you want. And Genghis asks, does every point in OpenStreetMap correspond to a spline point when rendered as a course in the designer? And the answer is currently yes. For now, I've not found a reason for removing what the user asks me to put into the thing. So for bunkers, I put every point in the spline. For greens, I leave every point in the spline. Cart pass the same way. If there's ever a reason that we find out we can make more accurate shapes or smoother shapes or help the user in any way, we'll add that. But for now, every single point does get rendered as a spline point. But the good news is that they don't take up a lot of resources. M. Nielsen asks, in OpenStreetMap, can you mark important tree locations? And so I actually have a surprise for people at the end of the stream that we'll talk about. But you can mark trees, but I can't use them as golf features currently. So like there's a tree, it's a tree, but it's a little hard to know exactly information about the tree. And usually trees can be placed by hand relative to the other features. And so I'll just remove this tree. And so for now, there's not a good answer for specific tree locations. So we saved that rough. So now what I'm going to do is, real quick while I'm answering questions, I'm just going to let it import the height map again. And this should pull down the additional OpenStreetMap features. And this is essentially the workflow that I have for when I design a course. I make an empty course, I process the LiDAR data once, and then after that, I just rerun the import terrain and features. So I don't have to make a new masks. I don't have to import the LiDAR again. I don't have to deal with any of that stuff that takes up all that time. And I can just work directly with my output. And this is the step that actually imports any of the additional OpenStreetMap features. And so you can change by clicking if you don't want bunkers. If you don't want to draw the water hazards as mulch, you can just uncheck them. If you don't like the cart paths, if you don't want the holes to be imported, then you can sort of fine tune all of that here on this page. And so this is kind of like the main sort of area. And this is where I would recommend that you spend a lot of time getting things right in OpenStreetMap and viewing them in the game until you're happy. And once you're done with this, then you're kind of done with this and you can move on to decorating and publishing your course. So now it says it's done rendering the preview. We go to course tools, and now you can see that there's a big green circle around the hole. That represents the rough that we just added. So that's kind of cool. So now I'll export the course, go to my pinned 2K golf club courses. I'll overwrite the previous Rancho, turn on my Xbox controller, and we'll launch the game again and see what we have. And so this is a step that I think is really important to sort of making and editing courses. Is we've only done a little bit, but let's validate what we've done. And so if you remember earlier, I just like the look of desert courses. I know it doesn't match, but I think that it really helps sort of everything pop. And so now if we zoom out, these are our water hazards. And we come over here, and this is the hole we made. And look at that. Now it is marked as hole number 1 because what we have to do is you can't start at hole number 2. So whatever the first hole you define is, so we called it 2, it becomes hole number 1 until there's a course with a hole with a number lower than it. So as soon as we complete hole number 1, this will become the right number because it's the one that comes next. But you can see that we have our tee boxes, we have our cart path, looks nice. We have the rough, which I added, which you can use as the prairie grass. This is the fairway spline. This is the bunker. And this is our green. And you can see that there's a big hill and backstop, which is true to life. And as we zoom around and we look at the detail, we didn't do any of this. This bunker shape came 100% from the LiDAR and from the OpenStreetMap lining up. And I think that this really makes things easier and faster for us to just click around the map than having to use Peek Through or Google Earth or just guessing. And the combination of these two, especially when you get the projection right, it really makes it easier to have everything just work and line up for you. And that was the main thing that I wanted to avoid. Is I have zero patience and I suck at editing and I suck at lining things up and getting the details right. And the more that I can have a computer do, the better. I hope I say this right, but Della 1274 says, after running the tool with a very hilly course, I opened it in TGC, but the entire object count was full and I keep getting errors. What could be causing that? And so the questions are, what did your mask look like? Were you able to paint enough in to the red area of the mask? Really try to remove everything that isn't a playable part of the course, because that really cuts down on resources. And then if you're still running out of air or space, then you will have to go in and uncheck the background terrain, which we can look at in the course now. And so you can see here that we've actually imported the entire area of the mask, but we've done it in a smooth and low transition for areas that aren't playable. And you can see this is the separation. So I was able to get these areas to match up to within this kind of accuracy, which is really quite nice, because you can see this is a road, and so it blends perfectly in as background, and it means that you don't have to deal with a lot of that step if you don't have to. And you can just see how it really works better than those sharp cliffs, but it does come at the cost of resources depending on how big your course and your area are. We used about a quarter, which isn't too bad. It's more than I'd like, and it's more than it really should be, but it's what we have available. And so now what I'd like to do is check alignment. And so I'll zoom in on this water hazard, and I'll just try to check the edges. And I want to make sure that the water line is at about the same height on every side of the water. And it looks like it's very close. Like it looks very symmetric in 3D. So that's what I like to see. That combined when we come over here to our bunker, and let's just sit in our bunker and notice that we're in a nice deep bunker, and the lip and the edge look like it matches the terrain. So that leads me to believe that the Bing satellite image in OpenStreetMap is correct and is lined up with the LiDAR data. This is a very critical step because you don't want to take the risk that your data doesn't line up with your LiDAR and OpenStreetMap, because then everything becomes a fine-tuning process. So it's much better to get it right now than to come back and try to fix it later, because that can take a lot of time. I've put everything in that you should need, but I can't promise that the amount of time and consistency required will be available kind of for you to fine tune it. But we'll talk about what you can do in a minute. But for now, we'll go around and we'll admire our single par 3. We'll look at the slope, and you can see that the slope perfectly lines up with how I remember this hole being such a pain to play. Like, the balls just love to roll straight off the front of the green. It's impossible to stick it here, and hopefully this is what you see for your course. And by the way, this is where I'd always land. This was my spot off to the side in the rough. And we can come out here to the fairway, look at our tee boxes. And so I'll go ahead and click play hole, and let's see what we can do. So we get this nice, cool looking overview of the hole. And Della asks, if the slope is really off on a green or tee, is that a problem with the LiDAR data? And it could be. Tee boxes, you may want to use the flattening tool to just flatten them down. And for greens, you always have the option of trying to improve the LiDAR data. But I would say that if the read, which is the specific roll of a green, is wrong, that's something that you can edit away. But if the slope of the green is completely incorrect, like that it should be back, but it slopes forward, then that means that there's probably something else wrong. So let me, just knock this out real quick. Oops. Well, turns out I'm still terrible with the controller. And you notice that it already knows that the hole's a par 3, and that's because we've set that in OpenStreetMap, and that's something that we can import. And so, for instance, it says that it's 159 yards. So let's do a quick little sanity check. And we'll look at the scorecard, and we'll see what it says. So we'll go golf. We'll do show scorecard. Hole 2 is 159 or 157 from the back tee. It reports here as 159 yards. That's close. I think that's right. So, I think we've done a great job recreating this course accurately, and missing the putt. Yes. Okay, so now what else is there to do? Well, we should go back to OpenStreetMap, because now that we verified that we're very happy, at least with the position of these greens and features, then we can go and look at ways to make life easier and what happens when things go wrong. So in OpenStreetMap, we can look, and in general, like I said earlier, I think Bing is almost always lined up the best, but it's kind of hard to read. And so if you click over here on this little stack, you can see there's something called background settings. And if you open, there's a whole list of different things that you can try to look at to get different quality for your course. And you just kind of have to go down to a few different ones and see what you think you want. But one of the ones that people often like is this one. When you zoom in a lot on Digital Globe Premium Industry, oh, and thank you, Scott. This one, it tends to be a little easier. Like this one's a little pixelated, but it tends to be a little sharper and clearer than the Bing is. So you can see the Bing's kind of blurry, but this one, at least for the bunker, you can see that this is, the shape is there. But now we need to talk about satellite images. So the number one thing that we need to do is, we know our LiDAR data is almost perfect. And we know that satellite imagery can vary a little bit, and especially with things that have perspective like trees. So for instance, I'll go to Bing and you'll notice that sort of these shadows in these trees, they kind of like spread out and they make little like angled shapes like this. And that's because the satellite takes images at a certain angle and they have to stretch and turn those images to get them to line up. And so when we zoom in, we know from looking at our LiDAR data that this bunker is exactly where we want it to be. Like, it could not be better. So I'm going to click on the premium imagery from Digital Globe, and now I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the background tab, click adjust imagery offset, and now we get to click here until we line up the bunker with the image. And this is by far the best way to get the data to line up in OpenStreetMap to where you want it with Bing. But you have to be careful because these don't always 100% line up in shape. And OpenStreetMap does not save this information for you. It's merely a convenience tool. And so this is about, I think, as good as I can get that bunker shape. And so you can see now that if I were really doing this course, I would take and I would zoom in and I would move these points to match up to the high quality data, because without the high resolution imagery, I couldn't make the shape of the bunker perfectly accurate. But now that I've centered it to where I know the Bing imagery is, we can go through and refine the shape. And just to double check, so this is 0.75 and minus 0.3. And this is something you should probably write down on a notepad, because you'll need to remember this, or you'll have to do this step every time you come in and you edit differently for the day. So now if we look, you can see that things look like they shift a little bit, but that's the perspective change. What we need to be sure of is that the positions of other things remain constant, like the bunker, the green, and our golf features. And like especially you can see shifts in the trees, and that's because they're very tall, and so they're the ones that get shifted a lot. But things along the ground, like most golf features, tend to be good. And so we can check our cart path here, and you can see that the imagery lines up pretty good. Like, you should probably take a little bit of a careful pass, but this is good enough to continue mapping the course. And basically just make sure that you map the data all within the same alignment. And so like one of the things here is that you can clearly see that like I kind of blew it on the green a little bit. So maybe I should have used Google Earth. And so this is something that you can pull in here to kind of get the right green shape. And usually this isn't a problem if you know the course very well. You'll know like which lines are which, and using the highest quality image available and after you line it up means that you're free to get all of these changes correct. I'll make a new point. There we go. All right, so we've refined our data a little bit. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just save it and upload it. And so one other thing I wanna note while we're here is that as you zoom out, you can see right there that the imagery changed. So we zoomed in and we zoom out and it changes. You need to be careful that you only edit on the imagery of which one you want. So this is as far out that you could trace using this premium imagery. Don't go here and trace because we did the alignment for this layer, not this layer. So as soon as it renders differently, you know that you've crossed over and you'll have to realign if you're serious about using that. But usually this is enough for me to edit, and you can zoom in and then you can see that this is a very nice clear bunker. You know, the green is very easy to map right here. Just draw the outline and you should be good to go. And so while we're here, I will show you, and Genghis says if it has an offset, he'll record it as a feature in the description field on the first tee box. So that's something else you can do, is it lets you add whatever you want in description, and you could put, you know, premium imagery offset 0.75 minus 0.3, and that's a good way to save it, and then you don't have to write it down. I don't think anyone in OpenStreetMap will get mad about seeing that, so that's something to consider. Let's see, so now that cart path and everything is in, I want to show you a trick with cart paths that you can do. So cart paths are lines, not areas, and so they'll come in and they'll look like this. Cart path, okay. And that's all right, but you know, that's not what it renders as in the game. It's going to be small. So something that you can do is you can take a line and you can trace the cart path into the wider areas that you need. And so I use this trick for things like this, where you park the cart next to the clubhouse and get snacks, or when there's like a passing area. And so even though it's a line, there's nothing about it that prohibits you from going in and doing this. And so we've connected a line to itself. And so what this would render now as is just a cart path that looks kind of like a star. But what you can do is go to tag and add area, and then yes. And then if you save that and click on it, so what we have now is an area that is a cart path, and it's for golf carts. And so this is how you render things like pullovers or giant areas. And what this tells the tool to do is to not render it as a straight linear cart path, but instead to fill it full of cart path material. And I know that that was one of the questions that was asked. All right. And then I'm trying to think of anything else in OpenStreetMap that we can cover. We covered rough, we've covered tee boxes and all the other types, we covered water hazards. So now let's go ahead and do the flat course feature. So what I'll do is I'll go out of the editor by just clicking on OpenStreetMap. And I don't know, someone name a famous course for me, like that we want to pull in real quick and see if it's updated and if someone mapped it correctly. Okay, we got one. Torrey South. So we'll go down to, wow, they said the same one. They're on a wavelength, ladies and gentlemen. So let's see, it's somewhere down here, right? La Jolla, isn't it? Is it here? No. Here we go, there's Torrey Pines North and Torrey Pines South. Found it. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hop into the editor real quick, and I'm just gonna see if it's done right. Fairway, putting green. All right, looks like someone put a little bit of detail into Torrey Pines. Actually, a lot of bit of detail. Like that looks pretty good. You probably want to refine it a little bit more if you were going to use this. But there it is. So now we'll go out of the editor, and now we're going to do something called export. And so we're going to click export, click manually select a different area, and then we'll go around here, and I'll shrink the box until it fits Torrey South. And then now hit the export button, and it downloads something called map.osm. And so what I'm gonna do is go in my downloads, and I'm gonna rename it to Torrey South.osm. Then I'm gonna copy it, go to my courses. I'm gonna make a new folder for Torrey South. I'm gonna put this file in there. You don't have to do this, but I just like to keep all of my data organized in the same folder. But nothing prevents you from making a new folder that's like called, Lidar, or a new folder that's called my first try, or any of that. And so now what I'll do is I'll go into the tools, I'll select a new course directory, and we'll choose Torrey South. Okay, but we haven't imported a course, so we need to do that first. So in this case, just to be lazy and quick, I'm gonna import our other one, which isn't a big deal. All right, woo, it's empty, hooray. And now what we can do is we can go into the import terrain and features tab, and not this one, but down here at the bottom in the OpenStreetMap submenu, we can click Make Flat Course from OSM file, and we can select this Torrey South. And now you can see that it went through and it did everything, and it says it's done. It's a lot quicker. Now, moment of truth, we hit Course Tools, and look at that. We've just rendered a flat course from Torrey Pines from OpenStreetMap into a TGC course, and I can go ahead and export it into the 2019 courses, and let's see how it goes. And so you can see that as long as the OpenStreetMap data is of some kind of reasonable quality, we may have just made some version of Torrey Pines without lifting a finger, which is pretty interesting. And these are sorted alphabetical, so if you ever have this situation, Torrey is after R, so it'll be the second one in the list. And voila! If you ever wanted to know what Torrey Pines would look like in the desert, then here you go. So this doesn't have any LiDAR data, so you can see that this is the underlying flat course. And so there's a variety of ways to fix this. Like you can truly flatten it with landscape flatten, and then just expand this out and sort of stamp here, flatten, stamp here, flatten. And so now we've completely flattened it, but you can see the spline import here, and there's your flat bunker shapes. There's a green. Now you can see this person probably doesn't know, or this might have been edited. So this doesn't include any of the holes, but it does include a lot of the other features. But a lot of people ask for this, and this is useful if your course doesn't have LiDAR, because at least it'll give you realistic distances and bunker shapes and things. And then you can go through and do the normal sort of only use landscape flatten and, kind of do your best to sort of pop things up and sort of shape it the way you want, and something like that. And look at that. Maybe, I don't know. Do you guys think I should stick to LiDAR, or do you think I've got a future in this? Is this a this is playable, right? Fro Daddy dropping the Pepe on us. And so yeah, that's how easy it is to make a flat course from OpenStreetMap. And so really, the better your OpenStreetMap data is, and the more that you can align it to the true place that it should be, then the better off you'll end up. And let's see. So I guess this is a good time to, let's see, we covered the question about OpenStreetMap. So I'll move on to this panel. And so this panel kind of has a what to do if things go wrong kind of strategy. And by the way, if you see this little fuzzy thing, it just means that it's loading and thinking. And so, like, let's say that you mapped your whole course using premium imagery because this was before you watched this tutorial, and you didn't know how to align it and double check everything. As long as you mapped it all from one satellite image and one satellite image only, and it's consistent within there, then you can take those same offsets and you can bump them here and sort of do something like this. And then, so like if we shift features, that just bumped all the features over, and it should correct them. And to be honest, if you're stuck, you can just set this to something really small, like 0.1, if you know that it needs to move north or south. And then you can just click it, export it, come back, click it, export it, come back, and you can fix it little by little. The one saving grace of the alignment is that as long as you're consistent, you can fix it this way, and you only have to shift east-west and north-south. You don't have to fix rotation because the compass direction to the North Pole, the geographic North Pole, is always fixed, and the satellite images and LiDAR and everyone gets that correct. And just for fun, you can see that like you could really like cause havoc, like, and you can shift things and make things not line up and move them off the map, and you can do whatever you wanted here. The rotate function is in degrees, and you can use this. I like it on the there's the one course theme that has the water only on one side. So I like to use this just to rotate the course a couple times to get everything lined up to the right side so that your ocean's on the right block. The auto shift elevation is the same as it is. It's just here in case you didn't do it before and you changed your mind, or if you have a hand design course that you need to change. You can manually change the elevation, like you could just jump everything 100 meters in the air. It's whatever you want. If you wanted to, you could separate the terrain. And so this is, if you have a slow computer or a lot of terrain, it may slow down the editor. So what you can do is in your thing, call it my perfect saved terrain, and export that into your course directory. And so now what we've done is we've taken all the land and we threw it into a file. And now we have just our features. And so now we can open this up in the editor in the game itself, and we can add the trees and add stuff. And if it helps the editor go faster, then now you've decorated a flat course, and now you can reinsert your terrain, and I'll load that up exactly underneath where it should have been. And so nothing should change, and this should make it so that the editor maybe can perform faster for those who have problems. And then the last really weird feature that I did, because I wasn't aware that adding the line type hole expanded the course beyond the 2,000 meter limit. So I thought that for courses that did that, you were going to have to make two little courses and then merge them on top of each other. And so, for instance, we can take this and we can just drop Torrey Pines right on top of where we had our Rancho course. And so it takes a little bit of thinking, and I do give you a confirmation, but if you look at it, all right, look, there's our water hazards from Rancho, and our hole is right there, and that's Torrey, and you know what, yeah, this looks good, love it, ship it. And so now we've just merged two courses together. And so the way that you can use this is if you don't use background fill and you want to compact your course into two like courses that nest together, then you can kind of use the rotate and shift and preview to really pack things in densely. And then you can fill in the ground beneath them on your own, or you can do it with flat shapes or whatever you want. And this panel in particular is useful for both courses that you've made with Lidar and for courses that you've made with just your buddies. So like, you know, let's say you decided, yeah, you want that ocean theme, but now your course is facing the wrong direction. You can come in here with a course that you've hand built and you can rotate it and you can shift it, and you know, you can separate the terrain that you've made from the game. And this is just kind of like a general toolbox. So now let's export this course, and I'll call it, sometimes I just like save it as all Z's. And the reason that I do that is so that I know that it's the last one to show up in the list. So let's go look at what shifted, rotated, messed up, Rancho, Torrey Pines, merge looks like in game. Ah, yes, it's perfect. It's a oh yeah, I forgot. I bumped it up by like 100 meters, didn't I? Let's see how far I pushed the course up. Yeah, that's a good. This looks playable. So you can see that like the tools, while you can do silly things like this, they're also especially powerful because it lets you fix or use them creatively in any way that you would want, and in any way that you need to build your course. Road crossing, anyone? All right, so now with that out of the way, let me go to the questions in the forum and see if there's anything that we've missed, and feel free to drop questions in chat too. And then after this, if there are no more questions or things slow down, I've got one more feature announcement, kind of live demo, first time ever running it, that we'll see if it works, for something that's new. Okay, so for line versus area and cart path, I've made sure to cover that. You can trace it with a line, and then you can manually set the tag for area is yes. And that's the best way to fill in cart paths. If someone marked a creek through your course, I would leave that there because a creek is something different, and I would just draw the water hazard as the actual lines of the hazard, with the understanding that the rendering on the map might not be correct, but what we draw is most important for the rules of golf. The area tool and when to use a lot of points. I like to use a lot of points inside bunkers, especially if bunkers have fingers that come inward and sort of have a lot of detail. I like to really load